Andrew Chan. Who are you and why should we listen to you?
I am a financial advisor, have my firm in the CBD in Pitt Street. Why would you listen to me? As a financial advisor, I help my clients plan their best lives. Often we can either go through life not planning, and by not planning we become takers of opportunity, and we often wait for opportunities that come to us. And the opportunities that come our way aren't often not for all of us. Some are very lucky, they might get all the opportunities that they want. But for those majority of us who don't get all the opportunities handed to us, we kind of flow along wishing for things that might have been different. And so what I do is provide clarity, purpose to the clients, and most importantly, for them at the end of the day, not to have any regret looking back, that they haven't necessarily achieved the things that they wanted to achieve, to have championed the causes they wanted to champion, to treated the ones that they loved the most with enough care and enough stewardship that they can themselves be proud of what they've done. And at the highest level, I believe everyone can create a legacy. And it's to have someone in your corner that's going to champion you fervently and help you provide a structure and a strategy so you have the freedom to achieve those things. So that is why you would listen to me, because it is me helping you. Maybe the option might be, the comparison is drifting through life with no direction, coming home from a busy day, starting the morning with the wildest dreams of what you might achieve, coming home, making dinner, sitting on the couch with Netflix and letting another day go by, right? You compound that year on year. You can lose a decade very easily. Why you would listen to me? Often in my industry, people talk about being able to talk to clients. So for me, I love clients. Clients are all individuals. So in my eyes, each client will have their own unique plan. And so they have their unique set of strengths, weaknesses. And so, it's a matter of them being able to find themselves, find out about themselves, understand, have a structure in which they talk about that and expand what they could be. I'm a business owner. I wasn't always that. I worked in investment banking in the past. For me, it didn't suit me. I felt that there wasn't sufficient, there will always be elements, maybe for example, my personality, I always want to learn more, discover more, be better, get more education, but that's myself. But then at the same time, you want to be able to create a business and you want to be able to help people. So creating a financial planning firm where I was able to take that knowledge and help people plan better lives, to give them balance. Now, for example, not everyone wants balance.
Yeah.
Right? There's some, and you laugh because there's a lot of people who don't have balance, who wish for balance every day, right? And there's other people who are so driven, and they have all the ideas, but they don't know how to focus those ideas on those necessarily. They might have 10 businesses, of which 3 businesses could take them right to the top. For me, planning for someone like that is a joy, because they're not going to leave anything behind in terms of their effort level, but they need that structure, right? And so often they will reach for the stars, and with good guidance, good risk management, they'll be able to achieve those goals sooner, achieve those dreams sooner by being very goal driven, by having regular meetings, by chunking down what's achievable today and what's achievable tomorrow. And the good thing about those clients is they never believe that they can't achieve anything, right?
Yeah.
So you almost need to temper those sorts of clients. Then you've got other clients who want but just don't believe yet.
Yeah.
And, financial planning, people talk about products and investments. I can tell you there's no point giving someone a product or throwing them to gearing or all those sorts of things unless they're happy, happy with what they're doing in life, happy within themselves, happy within their careers. Because at the end of the day, what you'll find is financial planner brings wisdom. And not everyone, you can grow up in a family where they have lots of wisdom, but that wisdom's not passed on. You can have a child grow up in a family where there's no wisdom and they've had to learn that wisdom through mistakes every step of the way. So through good planning, you're taking the wisdom that I might have and the process of having taken so many clients through that process. So not everyone has to fall into every single pothole or if you're sailing ship, hitting every reef, you can navigate those stormy waters to where you want to go without getting lost along the way. Because what we have, what is finite in what we have as humans is time. And often, discovering yourself and finding out who you are, what you want to do, that takes time. And so what I've noticed over time is that we're taking longer as young adults to find out who we are. So, if you look back a generation or two, 20, they're 18, 20, they're out of the home, they're already into their careers, rely upon themselves, and they'll start working. Or the generation before that, maybe a bit earlier, because they financially couldn't afford to stay in school, so they had to go out and work, right? And there's a whole amount of adversity that has driven them to work hard and be really practical. I think times have become a lot easier. I'm not speaking for everyone. There will be families that come here and emigrate here that have it tough, or families who fall on hard times. But we often have more freedom, and we've got those terms of adulting that children, young adults, and that's a very broad term now these days. You're talking from 21 all the way to 35, possibly older in circumstances where they drift in and out of the family home. There's that support because the generation before has been that much more stable. But in terms of time, they don't establish themselves in their careers till later on. They're finding their most important partners later on. They're making the choice to have children later on.
Yeah.
And what that does, it impacts them in their ability to generate financial stability for themselves if they don't have that just yet, right? At the same time, they're looking around, they're seeing social media, they're seeing all these influencers, all these people maybe looking successful, being free, and then thinking, well, I would love to enjoy that. I would like to retire early. I like to be financially free earlier. So if you take a late start, if you add in children, and then you put in the concept of wanting to retire earlier or be financially free early, it actually reduces the amount of time that they actually have to generate something worthwhile. So, and we all have our own individual needs and lifestyle requirements, but as in a consumption country like Australia, they tend to grow over time, right? As their taste of it. Not saying that's for everyone, but some people like to exhibit the expenditure through travel. Some like to give to charity. Some like to just live simply. But the reality is that Australia is not a cheap country to live in.
It's not.
Yeah. So, back to what I was saying about longevity. Financial planners are planning longevity, right? So there's a whole roadmap of life changes, from getting married, divorce.
Yeah.
Half the marriages end up in divorce. How do you negotiate that? How do you take care of the children? Your second marriage, how does it all blend together where you might have children from another marriage or you have children with your new partner? How do you make sure that everyone's looked after for future generations?
How do you make sure that everyone's looked after?
Well, that's a conversation where you have to plan, right? So you need to make sure that all the legal documents are necessarily in place, right? You need to make sure that you manage relationships, and that's why having a financial advisor and a legal team, sitting down with them, having those discussions at the forefront, because it's such a people-orientated service where, for for example, inherently in good families, children will want to listen to the wishes of their parents who passed away, because this is what we're talking about. If you pass away, and what's your estate plan, what's your legacy for the children, how will it be passed on? That's why we've had to change the way we plan. Originally when you talk about planning, it's about building wealth. As we become more wealthy, as that wealth passes from one generation to the other, you want to have those conversations not from a document with a legal representative. You want to be having those conversations if you have a healthy financial advisory and client relationship, that the client is often either the matriarch or the patriarch of the family, and you bring the family in and you say, hi, these are my wishes, and this is how I would like to help you. Because that's really what it is. You're not passing wealth and assets down to your children because you want them to fight.
Yeah.
Your legacy is the family unit itself. It is not the financial component.
Okay, I've got a question. It's a paradox because the younger generation nowadays, like you said, they're taking longer to be able to find themselves. Now, how early on do you reckon someone would need to come and see you and say, hey, I needed to plan ahead for my 7 generations?
It's interesting you say that, because nothing's defined in terms of when. There's certain people seek advice for just general advice, for personal advice to get a head start, right? Or people seek advice because they receive a windfall. So they're either divorced and they come in, they're now having to negotiate managing finances when previously their partner did, and they need to determine how much do I have today, how much can I earn, what's my working life, and how long am I going to live for, right? Or alternatively, someone's won the lottery, and that's a really great phone call for me to take. That it's in itself, but it's about habits. Then it could be someone who's created a startup, and their startup's just been bought out. Fantastic, right? And they're very different conversations, right? Because what you're talking about is how much do I have? How much longer do I want to keep at it? So when I say at it, it could be working. Some people want to work. Some people love what they do. But what I'm talking about is the people. I think you're talking about is the people who don't necessarily want to work. They work to live, so they don't live to work, and so they want to know how much longer, how much time do I need with say my financial advisor before I leave it too late, right? And I'm working a bit longer than what I could. I would say the sooner you start, the better. The reason why I say you start is you need to have a certain amount of income, because you can come to a financial advisor. You need to either have income, or you need to have a defined amount of assets for that advisor to work with. But most importantly, you need to come with the attitude that you want. You really want to make a change. So really, financial planning is not about how you were in the past, because in the beginning it's natural. If you don't have when we go out to work, we want to explore, we want to travel, we want to experience the world. At some point, you're going to get into debt. Then you have to get yourself out of debt. It's becoming more and more prevalent that young people with the buy now, pay later schemes, they're being forced into debt earlier with those bad habits, right? Before it's just a matter of a simple marshmallow test. Do you eat the marshmallow today? Or do you save the marshmallow test? Do you withhold yourself from eating that marshmallow and get 2 in 20 minutes time? That's the test that they ran on kids to see whether they could hold back and not reward themselves today. And that self-gratification, the more you delay it and that more the child could delay it, actually showed as they followed those children through decades of their lives. They had improved relationships, they had improved careers, they had improved finances, right? And so often, the role I play, depending on who that person is either helping them. It's less about the time, because someone who struggles with delayed gratification, I need more time with, correct? But at the same time, they might be really good at generating income. Delayed gratification causes problems regardless of income, right? So I've had doctors, anaesthetists, business owners earning, big six-figure salaries. But the reality is, if you can't control today, your needs today, you can always end up negative or net zero, right? You're going nowhere and really spinning your wheels.
Yep.
Or alternatively, you have a different situation where they're really, really good because they've had circumstances in their life where things are very difficult. And so they've understood the value of money, and they don't want to ever be in that position. And I have to take them and say, hold on a minute, we have more money than you could spend. We have more money than your next generation could spend. I need you to spend now, because your health will very likely deteriorate over the next 20 years, and I want you to have and enjoy that life. And often these are the people who are anxious high achievers. They're always pushing themselves, and it's to say planning's more than money. Often, I talk about some work to live and others live to work, and sometimes I need to say to them, hold a minute, there will be a life outside of work.
Yep.
And it is not healthy to define yourselves out of work, because regret at the end could be, I wish I had worked hard. I wish I had planned well. I wish, because I'm unable to provide support for my children or grandchildren in terms of their education. I'm unable to take my partner to the places we promised we would go, and enjoy a good retirement that is becoming longer and longer with the advancements in medical, with AI coming into medicine. You're going to see greater longevity, so you're going to need a greater pool of assets. On the flip side to that, the people who live and work and neglect their health, neglect their friendships, their regrets often aren't financial. Their regrets are, I wish I didn't spend all my time in the office. I wish I had more time to develop those relationships, because we do know, people talk about what people are eating in those blue zones. Remember the documentary on Netflix about longevity and how those
Yep.
people were moving up and down. It's not just the physical activity or what they eat. They come from communities.
Correct.
And what they've proven is people who are able to converse and have a close group of friends and family around them, they will live longer. And so, what happens to people that are so defined by their work? They sacrifice everything in their relationships, their personal relationships, their health, often to achieve that. So, their regrets are a very different set of regrets. And with those clients, I would start transitioning them, explaining them.
Okay. But let's talk about money. And if you were to explain money, or how a relationship with money, or how you should treat money to an 8-year-old or someone who is financially illiterate, what was the one advice that you would give them?
Money gives you options. So money gives you choice. So money is, you never, it's not healthy to tell an 8-year-old that money is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Money is a means to an end, right? So my advice is, never give up something that you have that you one day have to buy back.
What does that mean?
So if you have your health, don't give up your health only to try and buy it back with medicine.
Mm-hmm.
When we're young, we have lots of time in the world. We work really hard and we try and buy that time back. The smartest thing, for example, if you aren't looking to create rockets to go into space where you require that level of commitment of time or change the world, you want that balance. You want to be able to not be so one-dimensional. You want to take care of your health. You want to take care of maybe the people in your life that are important, be that family or whoever it may be, your community, your tribe, and then on the other side, you want to do things that are good, because as you have good relationships. If you don't foster those relationships over time, coming back those formative years, you might not have a chance to. And so, when you're talking to the 8-year-old saying, what does money do? Money buys investments that will give you time, right? And so, but often if you wait until the end, you'll forgone time with the 8-year-old. So if you are smart, you're saying you need to juggle and plan. So really that plan is to start from the very beginning, because it goes like this. The bigger the workload that you need to achieve, the more cost of your current lifestyle you need to give up to attain that within a defined time bound. But if you start planning earlier, because time will compound your strategy to allow you to achieve that goal, you actually it's less of a commitment the earlier that you start. So what I would teach an 8-year-old is the power of compound interest. So they would understand that the power of $1 today is by no means the power of $1 in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years time. Because the delay in investing, say that for kids it's easy, you might say $10, but you might say $100,000 to make it bigger so they understand it, is that you invest that $100,000 in that first decade versus investing $100,000 in the next 3 decades, for example, at say 7%. Your $10,000 in that first decade is going to be worth more than you putting $10,000 in the year 2, year 3, year 4, right?
So that's savings versus investing.
Well, you're investing, right? You're investing that first 100,000 or 10,000, first 100,000 that first year, versus someone who invested 100,000 on year 2, year 3, year 4, right? One's outlaid capital of 300,000. One just outlaid 100,000 10 years before the first. But the first person, because look at that compounding, the same rate of interest, well, same return, total return, they're going to have more at the end of the day at that 40-year mark, and that's because of time. So your question is, how much time do you have? As soon as you can. So as soon as you can is the best answer. And the sooner you can, like when you start a business, the quicker you will sacrifice in the early stages, but the quicker you enjoy it.
Yeah. You mentioned something about dreams versus reality as well. And in the instant age of possibility, endless possibility nowadays, everyone believes that they can do anything and everything. They can achieve anything that they want as long as they manifest it, they put effort into it, a little bit of effort into it. And you believe that that's not true.
Are you putting words in my mouth? No, I believe it's true. I 100% believe it's true.
We could achieve anything.
My style of planning is extremely positive. But there's a caveat to that. I'm also very, very realistic. So I'm realistic for the people according to their skill sets. So imagine each person may come to me and this is their skill sets that they have. I'll be able to understand very clearly whether those dreams are steeped with experience to back it up. And so it doesn't mean that I would say, oh, you can't achieve your dream. We can take steps to give them the experience and fund that experience to increase their learning so that becomes now possible, right? Often when we have dreams and you have the mates that talk and have that conversation after a game or whatever it might be, and they're thinking about, oh, I would love to be successful, and how's this idea? Where it falls down is they don't go away, write it down, create a mind map, create a structure, and create steps in which they're going to achieve that. So I actually really love it when people say, I have a dream. It's so much easier to plan for someone that wants to shoot for the stars. If I was to ask someone to plan for their future and they were like, because they have no dreams, right? You can't plan for someone with no dreams. But what sort of partner would that person make? They will, in 10 years from now, they have no dreams. So, a lot of what I do is to say, all right, David, you're David of today. What does David, having maximized his full life, achieved your greatest dream? What have you achieved? And then what did it take for you to get there? Let's work back. Which financial decisions today match up with that dream, David? That will change dramatically how David of today behaves, the choices that you make, the watches that you might buy. So, it's to say that, each person has their own capacities. Each client will have their own opportunities. Someone's set of cards are all different, right? So it's a roll of the dice. Some have a very, very lucky group of friends that doors will open for them every step of the way. Others don't. It's so, by planning, instead of, like we're saying in the beginning, is instead of taking what options are given to you, you're creating your future. So anyone who plans, to put it in I guess, a more relevant speak, is making people the main character of their own stories, right? To be able to determine where they go. Life isn't fair. Don't expect it to be fair. But what you can do is you can change the rules. So you can achieve, it doesn't take, people who are successful have been proven they're not more intelligent than their peers. What defines a successful, someone who's wealthy, who becomes a millionaire, a billionaire, as someone who take action quickly, who are energetic, who have a passion to chase relentlessly for their dream. Now, your question is dreams. So I would say dreams, plural, is more difficult. Planning is about clarity. So whenever I plan, there will be the dream and then there was the base level. So if we don't achieve the dream, we'll be able to retire, right? That's a good thing about planning with my clients, right? But back to what we're saying about dreams, the difference between dreams versus dream. I believe anyone can do anything with their life that they set their mind to. But there's a cost.
Opportunity cost.
Correct. And everything's about opportunity cost. And as soon as you understand that there's opportunity cost in terms of time, money, effort, then if we spread ourselves too thin, we'll never achieve. So when you say dream, I say I love it, because the people who succeed the most are the ones that approach the difficult, and the difficult often result. If it's difficult and it's worthwhile, then it will result in an amazing outcome. So, it's not just being difficult. Anything easy often doesn't result in something satisfactory. What's easy? Easy is eating junk food. Easy is being lazy. If your dream is to sit on the couch and watch Netflix, fine. Every day for 10 years, fine. But if sitting on the couch is you losing the fight and the will to chase your dream, to plan your dream, well, then that's an opportunity cost that you've just selected by not having a plan. And so you ask me why. I try and live my life and set an example to my clients to chase dreams. And so if you can believe you can achieve something, you believe you can work hard and create a dimension where you can illustrate balance in your life, high achievement, clients will be able to believe you, because an advisor who might not have their own business, it's very hard for you to give advice to clients who are business owners. So, often you want to know that they understand what they're going through, whether it be business, whether it's having family, whether it is the struggles of being a high achiever. They want to see that see those qualities in you so that they can understand that you can appreciate the pressures that they're in, so you can guide them to achieve those dreams.
I had a chat with psychologists who taught me about empathy, and with empathy you need to be able to experience what someone has gone through to be able to empathize with them. Now, what was your hardest moments in your life, you would say, that could get you to empathize with most of your clients?
Look, that's a very hard question. I had my clients often don't have the same upbringing as myself, and so I wouldn't say that going through what I went through, being an immigrant to this country, necessarily applies to all my clients, or applies to how they understand me, or me understanding myself, understanding them. I think, the difficulty, if what you're asking is what the difficulties in my life made me who I am, to make me a good planner, is to say that, being an immigrant in this country, where you went to school, you were the only Chinese kid in your year, or whatever it might be, you had to work hard, right? And there was never a kind word that was, I take that back. I did have kind words from some very kind people who welcomed me to the country, but on the other hand, I was born here, but I was always forever being asked the question, where you're from. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because you say Australia, and I say I'm Australian. They look at you and they say, "Oh, you're not Australian." If I went back to say Hong Kong and I say I'm Chinese, they look at me and they go, "No, you're not Chinese." So what I did learn growing up is that you're gonna have to do it yourself. And I remember this. My father always told me that you had to be 3 times better. You're never ever going to be chosen if you're equal to appear here. You have to put the work in. And I guess I've taken that work ethic and applied it in life, and in everything that I do. I wouldn't take it for granted that magically I would be chosen. So and often the clients that I choose are more attracted to me on my empathy through values. They tend to be really hard workers. They tend to be leaders in their field. And so they, naturally they understand what it is to work hard to achieve. And sometimes you can, not everything's perfect. For some clients, they've spent so much time working so hard in their careers, their marriages have fallen apart, right? And so, over time, it's just, as an advisor, you take the collective wisdom of not just financials, you're talking about life in general, from all decisions you might make along that pathway that will give you a holistic satisfaction of contentedness, to say that being a strategic advisor, is different from someone who is selling a product. Someone who's selling a product it's transactional. I give you this, you get this service, and we won't see each other. Mm-hmm. For every decision I make with the client, it is to say, I'm going to listen to you. This is what you want. I'm going to give you my counsel based off how well I know you and my experience. And we're going to revisit that. We're going to revisit that outcome today. We're going to revisit that outcome in a year, 2 years, 10 years, 30 years. But I'm going to be thinking about those decisions 50 years from now when we're sitting across from each other. And if you're not able to smile at me and be satisfied that we made the right decision then that that wasn't a good decision. That wasn't good counsel from me. So you can see immediately how much further I need to think in terms of, and how much more when I ask questions of you, say the client, I'm trying to get an understanding of how that's going to affect you. And as we will change over time, and what we don't necessarily just stop wanting things. We just change the priority and order that we want those things. And so therefore, plans and choices change with time. So when people make big life-changing decisions that impact their lives over the course of many decades, without thought of their happiness or without thought of the impacts to them, their future them, they're the decisions why having a good advisor who's going to look ahead and have the empathy and the experience to understand those steps, they're going to be able to give valuable advice. Not all advice is equal. So you have to look at who it is you're speaking to. You have to see, do they have the experience? Does their life represent what they're being able to counsel you on the life that you're looking to lead? And do you feel that you can open up to them? And so really the empathy that I have gathered over time to be able to have those conversations is just from the level of respect in being able to take care of and be a financial steward that they can trust in terms of their financial affairs. And over time, the relationships develop deeper and deeper. And I would say over the course of years and decades with a client, my ability to have more empathy for the client improves. So therefore, my ability to advise the client improves. And that is credit to the client, because you can only have that empathy improve if the client is able to share wholeheartedly and deeply their trials, their tribulations. And often when I've been supporting clients, and if you say most of marriages, 50% end up in divorce, right? And the average marriage lasts after 14 years. I'm looking after most of my clients for longer than what a marriage would be. So, it's a bit, I often pinch myself because I see it as a level of responsibility, because before the constant was the partner that they're with. But now the constant is the financial partner that I am supporting them in achieving what they want for themselves. And often what I do see is that there is more commonality in women now who come out of divorce that don't want to get married again, right? They're not looking to leave their financial future for their partner to decide. They'll have to be independent and free, and comes with that all the freedoms with it. And so, this is a developing trend. And so often they will need someone who's more structured in the ways of finance, because that is what I do, because they're chasing their dreams. And so this is what we talk about, opportunity costs. If you want to try and, there's no reason why people can't DIY, but I'm not going to try and mend my own taps. They're not going to be any good. The time for me to become an expert to do that is a waste of my time. You're always better off doing what you're good at. And I can tell you will derive more joy and satisfaction and contentedness by delivering the value that you find easy to do because you're an expert in your field.
Yeah. So when you mentioned about marriage and separations, is this where estate planning come into play as well?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear, estate planning is about how do I pass on my assets when I pass away. To have that conversation, you need to have assets.
Yeah. And
so, there'll be times where you might, and this will require teamwork between, if you have a larger asset base, between your financial advisor, who you're having conversations of what you want. You want to have the lawyer, estate planning lawyer involved to ensure that it's correctly documented. you want to have the accountant involved, because obviously there's going to be tax considerations for any investments or business interests that are going to be sold, or any entities, and how they're going to be managed from there on in. You know, you might have a disabled child in the mix. You might have a testamentary trust where, you know, they need that money paid out to them. You know, they giving a large sum of money to someone who's under 21 or unable to make financial decisions on their own. It proves really quite risky.
Yeah. My next question was SMSF. Now, there's a lot of hype on SMSF. Is SMSF for everyone?
Look, SMSF is just a tool, right? It's just another structure, and I wouldn't say SMSS are for everyone. I would say make sure you get advice. There was an issue a number of years ago where there used to be a carve out for accountants to give advice to set up self-managed super funds, and that carve out was since removed because there was a accounting firm that used that opportunity to set up a lot of SMSFs, and they left it all in cash. And a lot of those people were not able to achieve what they could, for often the cash will be left for 2 or 5 years. And, you know, for when we're talking about that timeline where they don't have enough time, the timeline is short to be able to build and compound that wealth. Oftenly at a prime when it's left, then that's the issue. So we get back to why people set up SMSFs and who you're receiving advice of. Now, the problem in this circumstance is that the accountant was just looking to create another entity.
Another income stream for them?
Yeah, another income stream for them, you know, regular tax returns. And so, you know, this is where conflict of interest really, that's what I don't like. You know, it's not simply look at who's giving you advice. Have a look at why they're giving you advice. And so for me, being self-licensed, we have our own license. We're not beholden to any institution or a big institution or another accounting firm or whatever it might be. These one-stop shops, there's always a principle that used to be in the primary business. That's where the expertise is. The secondary business, you're not getting primary expertise there. And so in this case, the carve-out is no more. The result of that is no more advice for self-managed super funds. So accountants understand that now, and so there's the licensed AFSL requirements, and so they will give that advice, anything to do with setting up a fund, anything to do with, because whenever you set up a fund, the ATO requires you to go seek financial advice.
Yep.
They encourage you to do so. You need to look at the fund, the financial advisor needs to look at the old fund, look at where you're going to invest in next. They've got to say, okay, you know, did you have any risk management, any insurances in your old superannuation fund? You know, you might have had some health issues identified previously that you weren't aware of, but because you had insurance previously offered to you, you know, it wouldn't make sense for you to cancel that if you couldn't replace that in the self-managed super fund. But just in terms of people and personality, if you're someone who loves spreadsheets and likes noting down every transaction that you make, and come tax time you jump up and down for joy and you pull up your shoebox full of receipts and you're saying it's tax time, I love it, then you know, self-managed super fund's the right thing for you, because that's really what it is. It is another entity to do. In terms of practicality of a self-managed super fund, really, the people who get the most benefit out of it are business owners. So business owners who are looking to invest in business real property for themselves. And so, you know, and for that first stage, it's going to take some money. And, you know, generally when looking at ATO, you're looking at a minimum balance of 200,000 before you go ahead and start doing that. Before it all makes sense when you're talking about actuarial cost, advice costs, tax costs,
Yep.
you know all the compliance associated with running a self-managed super fund. But even so, even if you can afford to, as I just described earlier, if you're not someone who wants, it's either you or your partner.
Yep.
So go have a conversation. Who's going to be responsible? Who will continue to be responsible?
With asset classes, what sort of asset classes can you invest with SMSF?
You can invest in all asset classes as long as the idea is it's not speculative. So the whole point of having a superannuation fund, superannuation is designed that the benefits are for the betterment of the members when they retire, right? So if the assets are unlikely to achieve what those long-term goals are for retirement, they shouldn't be in the fund. So every superannuation fund has to have an investment strategy. And so if it doesn't reflect, if you're taking the more risk you take, people gamble because they don't believe they can achieve their freedoms soundly, right? You know, aside from just having a flutter at the Melbourne Cup, that's fine, right? But as we become less and less likely to achieve the desired outcome with a methodical plan, some people are driven to take more risks to achieve that, right? Or some people, go on, you're going to ask me a question.
No. This is what really irks me as well, is we've seen a lot of clients come to us and ask if they can buy properties under SMSF without any advice. The SMSF is not even set up yet, with just a dream that they have been sold that if they purchase a property under SMSF, the rules are different. They can purchase as many properties as they want without, looking further into the future, that SMSF is actually for retirement.
So this is an area that often ASIC say the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, they're the regulator. Property is this grey area that's not particularly policed very well at the moment. They're very good at policing advice, people who are registered with an AFSL, but they're Australian Financial Services licensed. But there is this grey area where the property people will come and do a seminar with an accountant, a junior accountant, who they say, oh, you can set up all these self-managed funds if you just attend this seminar. But the reality is these people are coming in, and what's the objective? The objective of the property spookers is just to sell property.
Yep.
They're not, and it's their property. It's not the right property for them. It's the property that they have on their books. Now, there might be some businesses that do it really, really well, but for the most part, the overarching goal is for them to sell the property. So it's not to say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, we're going to stand by this over the next 30 years, 40 years to make sure you have a decision. No, it's to say, I'm going to get you hyped up. I'm going to make you feel that you've got a plan. But the plan is to fit this asset class that we're selling. That is not objective advice. Always make sure your advice is objective. I'm not saying that you can make your money from property, but if you are sold, a property in a small country town, and we're in a situation, and it's based off yield, but it gets valued once a year. Mm-hmm. It might be great, but often you might find, and I'm not saying this to be true, but you might find that it's the capital value is often impacted because it's so remote, right? Because we're buying property in a self-managed super fund. Often they're lower of income because they're less educated. And so therefore they buy a property and the property is of lesser value, so therefore it's more remote. And they're applying their thoughts of where they might be living. They might be living in a city like Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, and they're seeing property prices go sky high and compound, and they're applying those thoughts of property with that regional property, only to find out 10 years later that property is now 10 years older with all these expenses that go with it, but it has not actually appreciated very much at all from a capital standpoint. And so it goes to show you that, or it was the developer that sold you
the dream.
The dream, right? And then suddenly you have build issues and waterproofing issues that you never even thought of at the time, 10 years down the track, when you have to spend more money to fix it up. And so often they're some of the mistakes that people encounter, and because they're right now it's not legislated enough and they can't catch it, it's just happening so much, it's not the right thing. But if you think about it in terms of financial planning, often we're already going to buy property. Like I love property because Australians love property, right? So everyone wants to buy their unit or their home and have that security. Already the average Australian is going to be highly geared towards property anyway.
Yeah.
And so financial planning is about diversification. So, you can have other properties, but you're saying property is something that you often gear to buy, right? So we're talking about if you're borrowing to buy property in your own name and you've got a good income and you're negative gearing that property, your marginal tax rate might be 37 cents in the dollar, might be 46, if you're earning a good income. How does that comparable to borrowing money in super where the tax rate is 15%?
Yep.
So it's not even, the strategy is not even effective. And so if you're even gearing outside, most people were aiming to have an investment property, whether they're rent vesting or maybe they own a property and they bought their first investment property, they're already geared. And then the concept of then setting up a self-managed super fund and then gearing again is to say every speck of their income is reliant upon their strategy. So what happens in the downturn, for example, that's coming?
Very good point.
Yeah, is a property spooker going to tell you, oh, hold on a minute, you're not happy at work right now. You hate your boss. You say you're going to leave within the next year, or your job's in danger of being replaced by AI, and you'll have to change careers. At what point is that conversation ever had in those seminars? I would say probably zero, right? And so, it's less about the strategy. It's more the fact that it's advice, but it's product sales dressed up as advice. And people often deviate to what they know, and often those sound bites, clients don't come to me asking questions. Clients come asking, oh, should I buy the next investment? Buying the next investment is not what they're looking for. They're not looking to be rich from buying an investment. They're looking to gain wealth with the least amount of risk, as tax effectively as possible in the short amount of time. How they get there, it doesn't matter. But the reality is why are they looking to gain that wealth and security? So they can go and do the things that they want. So that they can know they don't have to be working for another 20 years. Maybe they can work 15 years instead of 20 years, right? Or they don't want to pull the plug at 15 years only to realize they should have worked 20 years and they have to come back into the workforce. So, being guided down the path through sales is what often happens when people don't seek advice. Seek objective advice. Don't have a look at. Make sure you choose an advisor. Don't be afraid. Believe it or not, all the wealthy people use advisors.
Yep.
And so the people who don't have money, they think about costs more than value because they haven't experienced the value. But really, when you choose your advice based off what you know, often you'll get a result based off what you know. If I want advice from a doctor, I'm going to choose the smartest, the most qualified, the most experienced doctor, right? I'm not going to look up WebMD and try and do my operation myself. Why? Because I'm going to pay for it. The advice might have been free. The surgery would have been quite cheap, but I'll pay every day with the pain, and it wasn't fit for purpose. So, does that mean that I don't believe property isn't a good asset class? No, that's not true. I believe properties are a strong asset class for sure. Has definitely been a standout, but we have we have so many different forces going on than simply to say, my dream was to buy a property, I'm going to buy a property. Often the dream is different. The dream changes. You might want to start a business. jumping into a pile of debt might impact your ability to raise capital to be able to own 100% of your business and invest it. So you'll be able to generate a profit between 30 to 50%, depending on, or even greater, depending on the scale and the type of your business.
Mm-hmm.
How can you compare that return with your property? And would you have the opportunity to go back? This is the time when you're young and full of energy to be able to take on those risks without many overheads.
Mm.
And so often I see that, the dream of home ownership often impacts budding entrepreneurs from chasing their dreams.
Yeah.
And that is where the real wealth is. And so, I think, often the questions that first asked is just superficial. You want to dig deeper. And if you don't have the capacity to become an entrepreneur, then great. Look at other asset classes. Look at just doing your 9 to 5 and being sensible.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you have what it takes, you have the skill sets, you have the drive, then, get some advice early on.
This is the question that I ask all the guests that comes on to our show. What is your fuck it moment? The moment you said fuck it.
Okay.
That propelled you personally and professionally in your life.
Yeah. Look, if you ever read Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yep.
My mother handed me that book when I was like 11, and she made me read it. It was fantastic. So like the different quadrants on how you make money in it, and it's got entrepreneurship, it's got investment, it's got and it's got being employee and then unemployed. Like it shows you how to generate wealth and how to view wealth. And, you had the poor dad give the advice that he could give. And then you had the rich dad who had lots of experience in business giving that knowledge. And it's not the fact that you need that knowledge in the family. You just need examples. And so that was a pivotal moment in understanding that, to be forever a student of life, to forever learn. So you can always learn from people who are more experienced. You can also learn perspectives from people who are from a different field. They don't have to necessarily have achieved financially. People have lived more colourful lives and with that they have a uniqueness about them, and to take that, I respect everyone's choice.
Yep.
For their lives, but for me personally, it is to say how do you secure and be able to have the choice to forever learn new things, to forever acquire new skills, right? Because it's, I often, growing up, I saw the kids that really studied hard and they were very one-dimensional, but they were always driven by their parents. And so at some point, they almost felt lifeless by the time they finished high school or university, and they want a break for the rest of their lives. Or they're always performing actions to please their parents. But really the reality is that life is going to be long. It's going to be decades long. You're going to have maybe 5 different careers, but each career you're going to learn different things, but you can only do it for one person, and that's yourself, right? And so, and for those that they did a study, and people would often do the bare minimums working for other people to not get fired.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who really stand out are the ones that will excel and do the best that they can because they're a student of life. They're forever learning. They're actually saying, this is so interesting, and how can I apply that knowledge to every other part of my life? And so it was in that moment when, working, when I was working in investment bank, and I was like, everyone's really intelligent, but they're all a slave to the dollar, and
Yep.
they're all spending 16 hours a day thinking they're crushing it. But what is the cost to them? now that's me. That's my journey, right? So I outlaid a plan for myself to acquire the skills to set up a business, to be able to bring those high-level skills in finance to everyday Australians and smaller businesses, that business owners that I looked after, and that's my passion because I want to help them. That I wouldn't settle for having a life where I wasn't necessarily sure on the good that I was giving. You know, often the house never loses in those big institutions, right? And so, for me, it's less about the money is an outcome. If you do well, find something that you can do to better people's lives, to better the community, and that is the wisdom. That is my aha moment in terms of what can you give back, what can you give to your community. So riches can be present in many forms, right? So service people, sacrificing their lives to the country, service people providing order, healthcare professionals. They're all great. It doesn't mean that they just because they don't necessarily have the financial well-being to do so. I think even more so that they have such important vocations or they're giving up so much. They being able to plan for people who are able to do such amazing things for community like that, that often drives me. And so, being able to go out and experience myself and to acquire skills that maybe where you can be an athlete and represent Australia on the world stage, that is also a goal, right? And so for me, that lifelong learning is to just pick up something, put all your heart into it. Doesn't matter where you're going to get to, but don't be left wanting. And so it's about never regretting.
Yeah.
So, often people live a life of regret because they wish they had done things differently. The aha moment is never the end. The aha moment's the beginning. I think maybe for me, if I was going to ask a question, what is if you were to look back at your life and be so satisfied, what would that be? Because then people would go, instead of starting and thinking about the catalyst, they'll think about where they would want to be. And, that's how I carry out my advice, beginning with the end in mind. Sometimes people confuse that with the financial end. No, I think about, what is the satisfaction of what have I achieved for my family, my community, for myself, for future generations. If you can answer that well, and you can answer that humbly, then I think that you've had a wonderful bit of planning to get to where you are.
Begin with the end in mind.
Yeah.
I like that. Andrew, thank you.
You're welcome, David.